Just We the People News. Alrighty. So this video is continuing of the last video. The last video was about a year ago. And this is more the updated behind the scenes. Now this guy is a civil rights lawyer. Alright, so subscribe to his channel. And look at some of his other videos. He's not bashful about putting some of these things out there. Alrighty. So subscribe, like to him, okay? There's going to be another part after this because I'm kind of trying to keep it short and sweet because we know how long retaining span is on watching some of these videos. Alright.
In a prior video, I first showed you the footage where my client's wife had filmed police arresting him in the front yard of their house. This was following a domestic call. When the cops arrived, boom, it went straight pretty much into a use of force against my client. The latter, basically half of that, ended up being filmed by my client's wife. So fast forward to the federal lawsuit being filed, and I'll link the original video here in the description so you can review that first. Now you get to see. This just happened last week where I took the deposition.
P.S. y'all, I was messing with my grandbaby at the time when I was trying to download the other video. So it was misspelled, and when I was trying to correct it, he accidentally touched the button, sent it, and I don't know how to rechange all that. So anyway, there you go.
Of the police officers who were involved in that incident. Got to put them under oath and ask them questions. So here's something really you rarely get to see, and I'm curious. I cut it up a little bit. This will have to be part one because it's long. I'm curious to see what you think. So you saw the video, and you can actually read the lawsuit allegations. Now you actually get to see the evidence. Take a look. Really curious to know what you think.
This is the video deposition of Joshua Bish being taken by the plaintiff, Civil Action 121 CV 615, Captain Melvin Sargent v. Joshua Bish et al., U.S. District Court for the Southern District of West Virginia at Bluefield.
Do you remember why you were initially called to this scene?
I was advised by Mercer 911 that there was a ongoing domestic between Melvin Sargent and another female, where Melvin Sargent had apparently was arguing and physical and was trying to kick down a door.
And do you remember who had called 911?
Off the top of my head, no.
Did you know at the time?
No. All we received was the name of the individual that was possibly causing the problems. And
had you ever been to that location before?
No, I have not.
Were you familiar with that location at all?
No.
Did you know who lived there?
No.
As of that moment, did you know who Melvin Sargent was?
No.
Okay. When you pulled up to the scene on November 28th, tell me about it. What did you see upon your initial arrival?
When I pulled in, I observed the female a few car lengths away, walking away, and observed Mr. Sargent, the male individual that was described to be Melvin Sargent, walking from the road in the yard, going towards the basement door of the residence. At that point, I observed the male. He was kind of walking with his fists clenched, kind of looked irritated, and the female was obviously upset, crying. And because more hadn't been certified and what hadn't dealt with any, I didn't feel comfortable with her approaching anybody that may have been aggressive of any way. I told her to go talk to the female, and I went to go talk to Mr. Sargent. It was one of those real quick, hey, you go talk to her, I'm going to go talk to him.
Let me refer you to your police report. Again, you wrote that report, right?
Correct.
You were aware of the fact that you needed to include all important details in your report.
Correct.
Okay. And you believe that you did that?
I believe I did, yes.
Okay. You wrote that Deputy Adair later advised you that Mr. Sargent and her were talking about Mr. Sargent's deceased mother, at which point her mother came into the room that they were in and rolled her eyes about the conversation, which aggravated Mr. Sargent, causing them to argue. She advised prior to law enforcement arrival there was no violence and nothing is wrong.
Yes.
Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
Now, you told me you didn't know who the 911 caller was.
Correct.
Did you ever talk to the 911 caller before arresting Melvin Sargent that day?
No.
Did you ever even find out the name of the 911 caller prior to arresting Melvin Sargent?
I think I remember asking him, but I don't ask him there and then to get all the information, but that was about it.
But you never talked to the 911 caller?
No, I did not.
Did you talk to Jolena Chavez prior to arresting Melvin Sargent?
Prior to arresting, no.
But prior to arresting him, you had not talked to any witnesses, correct?
Correct.
Prior to arresting him, you hadn't even talked to the plaintiff about what had happened or what had not happened.
Correct.
Now, what about Melvin Sargent? Did you know who he was?
I just gathered from the description 911 gave and his mannerism, how he was walking, and he was obviously upset and irritated. And I wanted to talk to him first, considering he was because how he was walking and carrying himself, felt he was more of possibly the possible suspect that 911 had described, and figured go ahead and talk to him before he gets too far away and I have to run.
So where was he located physically when you first saw him?
Whenever I first pulled in, he was to my 3 o'clock in the driveway, maybe from here to the second pew.
So he was located in the driveway to this residence?
Correct. And walking away from me towards the basement door.
And did you say anything to him initially?
I did. I asked him, hey, stop right there for a minute.
Did he say anything to you?
No, he acted like he didn't hear me, which I gave benefit of the doubt that just pulled in. The woman down the street was screaming pretty loud and crying, and my car was running. So I went around to the front of the car, kind of faster pace. Hey, bud, stop right there. And he complied.
Did you, upon your arrival, did you personally observe any crime being committed by anybody?
Upon my arrival, no.
It didn't appear to you that Melvin Sargent was threatening her in any way, did it?
I didn't see any type of threats at that point. No, he was walking away from her.
You didn't see any domestic violence, anything like that?
No.
Did you know at the time who lived at that house?
No, I did not.
Did you assume that these two individuals lived at that house?
I'd imagine that they was the ones that was living there.
Did you identify yourself to him?
Yes.
What'd you say?
Like I did with any time I approached anybody. I'm Deputy Bish from the Sheriff's Department.
And did you tell him why you were there?
I was getting ready to, hey, I need you to stop right there. He stopped, and I said, before hear over some type of fight or something, I don't know what else is going on, but before we go any farther, I need to pat you down and make sure there's no weapons or anything that can hurt me or you.
All right, so at the time this interaction took place, you're both standing in the driveway.
Correct. Close to the basement door.
And you had not at that point talked to Jolena Chavez.
Correct.
You had no idea what she had to say.
Correct.
You had not observed any crime being committed as of yet, had you?
Correct.
In fact, you didn't have probable cause at that point to believe that any crime had been committed.
I had
You can answer.
I had reasonable suspicion that there was something that had happened.
You got a domestic call.
Yes.
You had reasonable suspicion to show up to that call.
Yes.
Now, you know what probable cause is.
Correct.
You would agree with me that at the point you first encountered Melvin Sargent, you didn't yet have any probable cause to believe that he had committed a crime.
Correct. All I had was reasonable.
So when you first encountered him, he wasn't under arrest at that point.
No.
Was he a suspect?
No. He was an individual in the scene of the call that would fit the description of what was described.
So he wasn't even a suspect of any particular crime at that point.
Correct.
When this first initial encounter between you and Mr. Sargent took place, did he attempt to flee or evade you?
No.
So when you told him to stop, he stopped?
After the second time. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt because of the circumstances.
And then what happened?
He turned around, looked at me, told him, hey, my name's Deputy Bish, Sheriff's Department. You just stop. We're here over some type of fight. And prior we go any further, I'm going to make sure you don't have any weapons or anything that can hurt me or you, so we can figure out what's going on. He ended up putting his left hand kind of towards me, like this, and he started to move his right hand behind his back.
And at this point, you don't have an arrest warrant, right?
No.
You don't have a search warrant for the residence?
No.
So did Melvin turn around and face you?
He did.
You asked Melvin at that time for ID?
No.
Did you ask him what his name was?
No. My main goal at first is to make the scene safe.
Did you have any indications that this scene was not safe?
From how he was walking and his nature of how he was looking, felt that there may be something to it.
And you said that was the fact that he had clenched fists.
Clenched fist, how he was walking, and just his overall mannerisms. And
How would you describe this walk?
Tense, like his muscles were tense.
Were you wearing a body cam?
No, I was not.
And did Melvin say anything to you at this point?
No.
So at that point, were you detaining Melvin?
At that point, I was approaching him to conduct the safety check to ensure the scene was safe, and beginning to ask my questions for why are we here.
Well, I mean, was he free to leave and go in the house at that point?
At that point, no.
So you were conducting a safety check, and he was being detained, had to comply with that safety check.
Yes.
Did you ever ask for Melvin Sargent or any other homeowner or any other resident at that time, or someone you thought was a resident, for permission to be on the property?
No.
I assume nobody gave you permission to be on the property.
Nobody told me I couldn't.
Did Melvin give you any indications that he didn't want you on the property?
No.
You wrote in your report that at first Melvin began to comply.
Yes.
You told him to stop, and he stopped.
Yes, he stopped, turned around, faced me, put his left hand up, and started reaching behind his back with his right.
Didn't you ask him to put his hands on his head?
No.
You didn't?
No, I asked him to stop right there, and I'm just going to pat you down real fast.
You didn't write in your report that you asked Melvin to put his hands on top of his head?
No.
All right, I asked you if you asked Melvin Sargent to put his hands on top of his head, and your recollection is that you had not.
No.
But reviewing the report that you wrote after this incident, your report indicates that you did.
Yes.
Which is it?
It would be what's on the report.
All right, you wrote in your report, as I approached, I observed Mr. Sargent had his right hand in his right front pocket and his left hand on his side.
Yes.
I told Mr. Sargent to place his hands on top of his head, that I was going to conduct a safety check to ensure he did not have any weapons.
Correct.
When you asked Mr. Sargent to put his hands on top of his head, what did he do?
He put his left hand out in front of him and started reaching behind his back with his right.
And you didn't know who he was, right?
No.
All right, so then what did you do?
When his hand went up, and then I seen his right hand going behind his back, with my left hand, I reached around on his wrist to do a come-along hold with a simple wrist maneuver to gain compliance, because I didn't know what he was reaching for, and I'm not taking any type of chances to risk myself or himself or anybody else's safety.
And why specifically his right hand? Why did you grab his right hand?
I grabbed his left, I'm sorry, as he was facing me.
All right. Well, you wrote in your report that you grabbed his right hand. All right. I believe if you look at third paragraph, you say, I told Mr. Sargent to place his hands on top of his head, that I was going to conduct a safety check to ensure he did not have any weapons. At this point, Mr. Sargent began to comply, at which point I stepped towards him and began to reach for his right hand, at which point he started to step away.
Yes.
All right, so initially you went to reach for his right hand.
Yes, that was the one that was moving, but it was on his opposite side, and his left hand was right there in front of me.
All right, why did you begin to reach initially for his right hand?
I didn't know what he was reaching for.
Okay. It wasn't because you were going to handcuff him?
No.
Because he wasn't under arrest at that
No. At that point, we could play a whole what-if game all day with it, but if he would have just let me pat him down and found out nothing would have been wrong, we'd have been on our way.
He hadn't threatened you?
No.
He hadn't attempted to strike you?
No.
So what happened next?
When I was able to grab his wrist, he attempted to pull away very aggressively, and considering he was still trying to reach behind his back and then complying with me from telling him to stop, I ended up striking him with a closed fist to the right cheek, or left cheek, I'm sorry. I ended up striking him in the left side of his cheek. We began to spin around and wrestle around a bit till my back was to the house, and he ended up getting pressed up against a car door, a car that was in the driveway. I was able to get him spun around. At this point, Deputy Moore had came down, assisted with the wrestling match for a moment, and we both observed that there was a firearm in the small of his back. Deputy Moore secured that, was able to pull that weapon out and went to go secure it, at which point I was able to manipulate his arm a little bit more to where I was able to put him onto the ground. He ended up rolling onto his back, and we continued to wrestle. At that point, he was, in my eyes, he was under arrest, and it was pretty much just a big old wrestling match until Deputy Moore got back after securing the weapon somewhere, and we was able to get him rolled over on his stomach and handcuffed.
Right, but you didn't have any information or indication that he was armed at that point.
I didn't know.
So you hadn't seen the gun yet.
Correct.
So you're just treating him like anyone you're encountering, they theoretically could be armed.
Yes, anybody can be armed with anything, and my goal is I want them and me to go home at the end of the day.
But nobody had told you that he was armed.
Correct.
And he hadn't told you that he was armed.
No.
You hadn't seen a gun.
No.
So you hadn't run his criminal history or anything like that.
No.
So at this point,
We're still in the driveway, but because we're moving, it's the doors. I'm not sure.
All right, this is We the People News.